My name's David Banisch. I was born in Jersey City, New Jersey, 1960. I'm 61 years old now. Spent the first 9 years of my life in Park Ridge, Bergen County, and the next 9 years of my life in Barrington, Rhode Island, which is really where I grew up. I moved back to New Jersey in 1979, February of '79, which is when I first came to Whitesbog. Within a week of moving here, friends took me out to Whitesbog basically for a visit. And that's when I initially got to know the area. As far as education, I have a basic high school education. Today I'm a professional planner in the state of New Jersey, and I do planning consulting work.
So what can you tell me about your first encounter or like your earliest memories of coming to Whitesbog?
I worked at a hardware store in town, Brown's Mill Supply, and everybody in town would stop in at one point or another. Invariably, they needed something, and it was the place to buy whatever you might need in the way of hardware supplies. And that store sold everything. It was owned by Henry Hobart and his sister Matilda. And as I said, just about everybody came through the place, so I got to meet a great number of people, including the folks who were working out here at Whitesbog and the people who worked at J.J. White. J.J. White had a house account at Brown's Mill Supply. And I don't recall whether the Conservation Environmental Studies Center, which was active here at that time, I don't recall whether they had a house account or not, but folks who lived out here that worked for the Conservation Environmental Studies Center came to the hardware store with some frequency. And two girls, then at the time I'd have to call them girls, Michelle Byers and Betty Ann Kelly came to the store. And back in those days, a lot of people were buying wood stoves and kerosene heaters to stay warm. And they lived in the schoolhouse, just not far from the general store here where I'm sitting. And they bought a stove, and we struck up a friendship.
So when you were working here at Whitesbog, what projects were you part of? Was it mostly preservation, or were there micro projects that you worked on?
Well, I'd say the big project initially was getting the trust incorporated and securing the lease, and then ultimately putting together with the other trustees, of course, that administrative capacity that was needed to make the Whitesbog Preservation Trust a going concern. There were a number of projects along the way, but they were mostly public visitation projects. They were the festivals. They were ultimately the Halloween party. I think we had something around the holidays that was also a very popular, I don't know if it was a candlelight walk or something like that. But the village would get decorated, and you know, whenever we would have these events, of course, we'd have to make accommodations for the public. And so those were really primarily the projects that I worked on here. And then on more or less an ongoing basis, probably for about 15 years as a member of the trust. Monthly meetings and just dealing with whatever came up, or some piece of it. Initial group of people, I think the founding trustees included Michelle Byers, Rick Brown, who worked for the Pinelands Commission at that time, still lives in Pemberton Township, Bill Bolger, who was working for, I think, the EPA office in Philadelphia, Chris Bethman, Barry Brady, my brother Frank Banisch, who was the township planner at that time, and I think Lynn Kosek may have been a trustee as well. I know she was a big supporter of all the activity out here in establishing the trust and running the events. I can't recall whether she was a founding trustee or not. And I was a member of that group as well. I think the first president of the trust was my brother, Frank Banisch. And I think he served for a couple of years, and then John Gillespie, someone from Brown's Mills, who was then the township solicitor. He was actually a lawyer over in Moorestown, and he was a big financial supporter for the Whitesbog Preservation Trust. He became the second president of the Whitesbog Preservation Trust. And then I think our third president may have been a man by the name of John Nardone, who was from Mount Holly. And he appeared on the scene at one of the events and told us a story about his family having been involved out here at Whitesbog. I think his father or his grandfather may have lived or worked out here. And he initially, I think, became a trustee, and then ultimately became the third president of the trust, if memory serves me right. I can't recall whether there were other members, other founding members of the trust that I just didn't name. And I just want to say to anyone who may have been a member of that group that I apologize for leaving you out. But that's pretty much the group as I remember it when it started. Well, one thing about Whitesbog is it was a very popular place for people who lived in Pemberton Township and Browns Mills in particular, but people from all over Pemberton Township would come out here. And having lived at Sunningive, it is the last house in the village on your route out to the bogs and the blueberry fields, as they were at that time anyhow. But people would come out here and they'd drive around at night, commonly. There was a lot of partying that went on. And there were also a lot of knocks on the door in the middle of the night. And it was mostly because people would drive off of the narrow sand roads and they'd put their car in a bog, and they needed a tow. And there was a guy in town, Bill Anderson, whose number we kept by the phone. He'd be out in 5, 10, 15 minutes. He lived and he had his shop on Lakehurst Road, between Country Lakes and Browns Mills. The tows were something, or the dip into the drink was something that was very common. And we'd have people coming by commonly at night, looking for a telephone to get a tow truck. That was back, obviously, before the days of cell phones. So that's something we'd seen a lot of in those days. The place was. The other thing I think that anyone would see coming here to visit, I'm sure especially today, or even today, is people come here and go out to the bogs and they spend time on their own. They know the place as their backyard. And I think for a lot of people, it's an essential part of their life. You know, it's their backyard, it's their downtime. It's their opportunity to come out and enjoy nature and some time by themselves or exercise. People come, park, ride, they drive through the bogs, but they come and they park, they walk or they run. There's a lot of visitation here. I think back in those days when we were first getting the trust off the ground, it was very popular, and I'm sure it remains so today. I think the reason that the Whitesbog Preservation Trust is here is because a group of people had a passion about the project, and they wouldn't take no for an answer. For anyone who sees a project out there in public service and has a passion for it, I think the important thing is to try to assert your will as best you can and pursue it, and don't take no for an answer. Every time a roadblock came up for the folks that started the Whitesbog Preservation Trust, they just worked at it until they found a way to solve whatever the obstacle was, get around the obstacle, whatever it was. And I think in the end that those efforts were really worth it, because I think the real beneficiaries here are the public that continues to visit the bogs and really appreciate all the resources that the trust has to offer in terms of interpreting the history of the village and interpreting the natural resources that the bogs and the forests here have to offer. So, you know, if there's something I would say that I learned from this exercise, it was that when you have a vision like that and it's in service, and you can hit the wall, it might get a little bit difficult. I think the key is to just not take no for an answer, and work as best you can to find an answer and a solution to get to where you want to go.